I'd like to introduce David Pineda. He's the Managing Director of DPE Consulting, International Consulting. IPA has been working with David a few years now for the CODEX initiative. And he's got a lot of experience in CODEX ALIMENTARIUS, so please help me in welcoming David and his discussion on CODEX and probiotics. Maybe a harmonized approach one day.
Thank you very much, George, for your very kind introduction. Before I start with my presentation, I would like to thank the organizers and particularly IPA for inviting me to give you a presentation on the current regulatory state of play for probiotics internationally. So we can all agree, and this has been very evident during the pandemic, that the growth of the probiotics market has continued. And obviously, with an increased consumer demand, there is a necessity for more regulation or guidelines. We are all aware of the 20 years ago FAO and WHO work on it, producing two reports, one in 2001 evaluating the information on the functional and safety aspects of probiotics and naming priorities for the evaluation. And in 2002, providing a methodology for the use in the evaluation of probiotics and define criteria for health claims for probiotics. But as Luis has concluded his presentation, the recommendation on the definition was a milestone at that moment. And but if we are looking at the working codex, which actually it is an international organization created by FAO WHO, at this moment what we are finding is that there are several standards and guidelines that are covering categories of products that use probiotics, but none of these standards in codex are including provisions specific for probiotics. Therefore, here there was a need, or it was led to the need to present a proposal to develop international standard in CODEX, which I will develop further. There are some horizontal standards on food hygiene, food additives, contaminants, labeling of foods, and claims that apply to all categories of food, so therefore would also apply to those foods and supplements, including incorporating probiotics. But as I said, there are no specific provisions for in Codex for probiotics. So when we are looking at FAO WHO issued two reports 20 years ago, and Codex yet has not developed specific provisions. The scenario internationally show us that there is important divergence, important differences of regulation globally in terms of the product classification, on the definition of probiotics, in the permitted probiotic microorganisms, the conditions of use, labeling requirements, the use of claims, and even on their market entry requirements. So in terms of product classification, depending which country we are talking about, sometimes those foods, including probiotics, would fall on within a category of food with probiotics or foods with functional claims, because obviously in many cases the product will come with a claim, or health functional food, probiotic yogurts, it's a long list there. Supplements are, and therefore also those included, including in probiotics, are in the majority of the countries in the world regulated as a food category, but with a specific regulation as well. And then, as we have seen, for example, the presentation from Australia, in some cases they are classified as a drug product under the medicines framework. When we look at the definition of FAO WHO, I think we want to see how this has provided influence all over the world. And we see that there are some countries that have actually copy-pasted the definition. Others have developed regulations definitions very similar to the FAO WHO, but they are not the majority. The majority of the countries are not incorporating definition yet. We also have very few examples of countries where there is a definition that refer to the focus or focus on the digestive health, to the balance of intestinal flora, like it is the case of Italy. So in terms of the permitted probiotic microorganisms, There as well, what we see is that different approaches between regulators or in different countries. Sometimes we have some examples, particularly in Asia, of a positive list of probiotic strains to be used both in food and supplements, or only for foods, or only for supplements. In the case of Brazil, for example, it is a positive list of ingredients in general that are allowed to be used in supplements, but they are incorporating, and even more recently, more probiotic strains. Other lists are also being used as a reference. They are not positive lists. They are not a prescriptive list. They are, for example, the list that has been developed by the European Food Safety Authority on qualified presumption of safety, basically referring to microorganisms which are intended to use in food and feed, but do not raise any safety concerns. This is a reference list for many business operators that want to market their products in Europe. In Mexico, there's an informative list, but actually it is included in the yogurt regulation. Now it's under review because they are looking at perhaps establishing this list in the fermented mix regulation. And then we have the approach of many other countries evaluating on a case-by-case basis. In very few cases, there are specific and comprehensive protocols on how the evaluation will be carried out. In other cases, in most of the cases, there are not. Then when we look at the conditions of use and labeling requirements, we have a massive divergence there. We will have to see first the general labeling provisions that apply to all types of foods and supplements, also specific for those labeling provisions for certain categories. We have heard today a lot about the important differences in the approach on the use of the term probiotics, particularly in Europe. And then also there are differences in the specific labeling requirements for probiotics in terms of the declaration of the genus, species, or strain. And there are also differences in the requirements for minimum of colony forming units, even difference between product categories. So we have an important work to do here. So I'm not going to extend here. I think it's very relevant that also for the international community and discussions at CODEX level, what the position of the European Union is, because at the last meeting in 2019, they were based very much on the year 2007 guideline, and now all this trend may change, may generate further discussion internally among member states. So this is positive. In terms of one main general on claims is that more and more are pre-market approved, so they have to be authorized before they can be marketed. The CODEX guidelines for the use of nutrition and health claims has been very instrumental in the way that it has defined different types of claims, and for example, claims for other functions, that would be the ones applied to those products, including probiotics. And also because it has in an annex the scientific requirements for substantiation that they go as recommendations for authorities all over the world, and when they evaluate the information, and they highlight the importance of taking into account the totality of the available scientific data. But still, there are big differences on that, and we also need to take into account that in some countries in the world, like for example in Mexico, health claims are not allowed to be used in supplements. So also it's important to observe what restrictions apply to certain categories. In terms of the specific trends, I think we all know that more and more, because of this pre-authorization of claims, that comes also with accepted wording. Sometimes has to be literally used. Sometimes there is, in some other countries, they provide a framework, and there's a bit of flexibility. And then what we are seeing is claims mainly on digestive health, lactose digestion, absorption, but we also see more and more on the immune system as well, and allergy reaction. In terms of market entry, this is not a slide I want to use much time because I could be here for a long time, but this is to highlight the example of why the using of probiotics or an ingredient in a product can change the procedure, the administrative procedures to place your product on the market. Like in the case of Brazil, there is in red, but actually foods and supplements in Brazil do not need to be registered. They don't need that. But those who include probiotics, yes, it's like an exemption. So it's important to observe that as well. So all these important differences in regulation all over the world, after intensive work we have done over the years, has led to the necessity to present a proposal for CODEX guidelines on probiotics for use in foods and food supplements, which, of course, as Dr. Andrea Moser has presented, Argentina, together with Malaysia, now is championing this proposal, and with the objective of developing a harmonized definition and minimum requirements, mostly to a consistent application and interpretation of the FAO WHO definition and guidelines. And also in the scope, there's a proposal for specific labeling requirements or provisions. As Dr. Andrea Moser said, in the last meeting there was and due to the heavy workload of the Committee on Nutrition, there was a need to develop a mechanism to prioritize work. And therefore, that means that this proposal, it will be first looked at as whether it's a higher or lower priority within the work of the Committee on Nutrition, with this criteria that Dr. Andrea Moser has explained literally, but it's important to highlight how we'll score the impact on public health, on food safety, and fair trade practices. Again, due to the heavy workload of the Committee on Nutrition and that we are moving to having moved into a virtual world, the committee has decided to split a bit of the agenda, and all the new work proposals will be not discussed at the next meeting, which is going to happen in November this year, but in June, which they hope is going to be a physical meeting based in Germany. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to any questions when possible. Thank you.